Hi, I'm Natalie Baker. I'm a psychotherapist and certified neurofeedback trainer. And I'm going to talk a little bit about relationship styles, attachment styles, and the brain, and why it is that you may not be seeing the progress that you want to in your relationships, even though you understand attachment styles and are trying new strategies to improve your relationships. So the first thing I want to talk about are just to review the attachment styles that people form based on their early childhood experiences. So one of the most important things to remember about how you interact with partners and loved ones as an adult is that the seeds are planted for the dynamics in those relationships when we're children, and specifically with our primary caregivers. So when we have a loving parental unit or individual who takes care of us and can anticipate our needs, is in attunement with our emotions, creates a sense of security and safety, and is loving, and their nervous system is regulated, so they're calm and they're open and they're receptive and responsive, then our nervous system, our brain, and our sense of ourself in relationship will mirror that. And that kind of attachment style where we can be open, we can express ourselves emotionally, we can put ourselves aside, and we can listen and take in other. We can form trusting bonds. All of these qualities come out of that early relationship, which we call a secure attachment. Now, if you're watching this video, chances are you had some secure attachment or you had a mixed bag. So I want to talk about the three styles that we've come to understand about how we form relationships based on what's called an insecure attachment, which means that our relationship and our communication with our primary caregivers were not ideal, or they weren't quite good enough for us to develop that sense of security, trust, feeling loved and cared for when we were very small. So we can say 0 to 5 as the age in which we're really learning how to have a relationship and what to anticipate from that loving other who we love. So the three insecure attachment styles are the insecure attachment, avoidant attachment, anxious attachment, and disorganized or chaotic attachment style. So again, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized or chaotic. And so the thing we need to understand again is that this kind of imprinting that happens doesn't just happen interpersonally and behaviorally, but it also happens on a brain level. And so when we're addressing our relationships as adults, we also have to not just address how we're thinking and how we're feeling, but we also want to address how is our brain functioning, and is it functioning in a way, are we caring for it in a way that's going to help us to develop that secure attachment style. So going back to the three styles, so the insecure attachment of the anxious relationship, which comes, this is my fancy graph. So this is the brain. This is the stress response of the brain. When the brain is perceiving safety, it stays in this zone, which is the regulated zone. And in here, we perceive the environment as safe. We perceive other as secure, forming, trustworthy, someone who we can be open with in our relationships. We can use our words, our behavior. They're going to take in who we are. So this is what happens when that limbic brain, which is our stress response brain, perceives the environment as safe, and specifically the people who are caregivers, who we have a loving relationship with, that they're safe. So that's secure attachment. Up here, we have the fight flight response, right? So that's hyper arousal of the limbic brain. And the anxious attachment style where we're uncertain, we're not trusting, we become overly attached to a person, we worry about the relationship, we are anticipating rejection, we are anticipating that we have to perform in particular ways in order to accept the love. That is someone who is more in the hyperarousal fight flight quality of the nervous system. So then if you want to talk about the chaotic style, that tends to be a more extreme type of training of the nervous system. So there can be a back and forth that happened in early childhood relationship where there was more extreme sense of danger. So there may have been violence, there may have been addiction. And so what happens developmentally with that kind of a relationship is that the child is much more having to go into a survival mode when they're in relationship with other. So they might sometimes feel like they have to flee the situation, or they might feel like they have to play dead and collapse. They might also go into the fight response. So these are people who tend to also take on the quality of feeling like their relationship is not just untrustworthy, but also potentially dangerous. And so they're justified in using more aggressive means to communicate and be in relationship with other. So that might include name calling. It might include being physically violent. It might mean being passive aggressive and ignoring the person, but they tend to go back and forth between that hypoarousal, which is the freeze response, which is where we go into collapse, we feel powerless, we avoid. So now going to that third, the avoidant attachment style. So they tend to also go back and forth between these two zones, only they're in the flight mode. So this person learned in early childhood that being close and open to the caregiver was somehow dangerous. It could be dangerous in the sense that it could be a narcissistic parent. And the danger isn't physical danger, but the danger is more like emotional or psychological annihilation, where you feel like I'm not seen. In fact, I'm being taken over, which is a legitimate developmental need that a child has, which is to be seen and acknowledged as separate and valuable as a separate person. So someone who is an avoidant attachment style, they could have a narcissistic parent who just wants to see a mini image of themselves or control the child. And so the strategy for staying as a separate self is for that person to avoid relationship, to run away, whether running away psychologically, getting distracted on their phone. It could also include really shutting down. So the other person wants to communicate and their system, their limbic brain goes, oh, this is dangerous, shut down. And so they'll stop talking, they'll look away, they'll walk away. They won't have the words to communicate. So the thing to remember about attachment style and your relationships today is also that limbic brain habit of these three zones is an automatic response. So when there's a cue in the environment that is similar to a cue in relationship from when we were young, we're going to automatically assume that this relationship is like that relationship. And that limbic brain, which functions on its own, independent of our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that can delay gratification, that can think through a problem, that can pause before and reflect on before speaking, so being responsive rather than reactive in their communication. So those are the qualities that you see in a regulated brain that when we're triggered disappears. And now we're back up into these fight, flight, or freeze strategies, and those are automatic. And so that is why you may intellectually understand and be thinking about these attachment styles, but you may also find that you're still very reactive. And that is because we have to take care of that automatic functioning brain that produces that reaction. And this is where the neurofeedback piece comes in. So neurofeedback is a biofeedback system, but specifically to look at and train that automatic functioning brain to come out of that fight, flight, avoidant, reactive, defensive styles of communication and to come into that regulated, secure attachment style. So we want to work on it on all levels. We want to work on what are the behaviors that I do in relationship that are insecure or avoidant or destructive in some way. We want to think about it in terms of our belief systems, right? Are people that are close to me going to hurt me? Do I believe that as a truth? Can I know if this person is genuine and trustworthy, right? So we have to look at our belief system. So we look at our mind, we look at our emotions. Am I getting reactive? We look at our behavior. And then we also need to look at that automatic functioning brain. And if we're going into a reactive pattern without having the ability to stop and reflect and make different choices, or we sort of are, but we want extra support. We want that brain to calm down so that we can then behave and act from a different place. That's where we want to bring in the neurofeedback piece, which is a non-invasive brain training. And it's basically showing that limbic brain over and over again that it's going back into that stress reaction, so that the brain can then pivot out of that. Because when the brain is trained with neurofeedback, it sees over and over again what's happening in the present, in the here and now. And in the here and now, the environment is safe. There's nothing that is going to harm us, rip off a limb, stab us, fall on us, right? The limbic brain's definition of safety is very literal. Is something going to harm this body in less than a minute? Am I going to be annihilated in some way? And the answer is no. And so when the brain sees that over and over again, and it sees that it's habitually going into that stress reactivity in relationship, it's going to go, why am I doing that? And that brain is motivated because it takes a tremendous amount of energy to stay in that reactive mode, that fight, flight, freeze decision making. So it's going to pivot naturally. It's going to calm down and cheer up. And when it starts to really live in this zone where it's open, it's calm, it can pause, it can reflect, right? The prefrontal cortex is more online, so you can think through how you're going to be different in relationship. You can notice your feelings rather than just immediately react to them. So that support of the brain training, along with your good motivation to change your relationships, as well as successful strategies for interpersonal communication that we all need to learn. You put those pieces together, as well as some exercise and a healthy diet, and you have the complete package to be able to transform your relationships with others.